Hello, this is Mike Swartzlander, and I'm very pleased to be giving you this update on the USA for the suppliers at the Synergy Global Supplier Meeting. Sorry I couldn't be there with you. I hope to meet you all in the future. So here is the agenda I've prepared for this brief discussion. I'm going to introduce myself. I'm going to give you an update on business conditions in the US. And finally, I'm going to briefly touch on expectations of US customers for suppliers. So let's get started with the introduction. Again, my name is Mike Swartzlander, and I've been around for a long time. In fact, I just celebrated my 65th birthday. I have 40 plus years of experience in corporate America, and for the last several years as a consultant. I'm a chemical engineer by education. I have an undergraduate degree from Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and I have a master's degree in chemical engineering from the University of Delaware. And I also have a number of executive business degrees now from Northwestern University and the Ohio State University. So I started my career as a chemical engineer doing plant design, doing R&D, doing startups of plants around the world. And most of my time I've been very involved in international stuff. And then I migrated to business and I ended up managing a number of large chemical operations for several companies. The largest business I managed was about a $500 million in annual revenue business selling products to the global foundry industry. So I learned a lot over those years about metal castings. I have extensive India experience. I made my first trip to India in 1981 to Baroda, India, where I had the opportunity to sell Indian Petrochemicals Limited, a chemical plant, the technology to make ethylene oxide, ethylene glycol. And I was successful to do that. I was a very young man. I was not even 30 years old at that time. I worked for a very famous company, unfortunately, in India named Union Carbide at that time. So anyhow, I became very familiar with India at an early age. And my last career move in corporate life was to start up the Indian operations, the wholly owned operations for a multinational called Ashland Inc. I lived in Bombay from 2007 to 2009 in doing. Okay, so that's a little bit about me, and again, that's we can anytime I have a chance to meet you all, I'll be more than happy to discuss my background. So let me give you a U.S. update. Things are good. In fact, things are going really well. The best that I can remember really for a long, long time. We have very low unemployment, the lowest unemployment in almost 18 years. So that's great news. We have low inflation. Our inflation rate is less than 2%. So that's, generally speaking, good news. We have a booming stock market. The stock market, even this year, is up 25% plus. That's fantastic news, especially for me, because I depend on my investments these days. And we have massive federal deregulation going on with our new president, President Donald Trump. He's unraveling a lot of stuff that was implemented by our prior administration without really going through Congress, by the way. But these were extraordinarily burdensome regulations to individuals and to companies. And finally, we've got pending federal tax reform that is probably the most significant tax reform ever. Let's keep our fingers crossed that our companies and our citizens can enjoy lower tax rates. So now let me give you an update on U.S. manufacturing. I've chosen this picture, by the way, because of something I'll tell you in a second. U.S. manufacturing is huge. You may have heard that it's shrinking. Well, it depends on how you define shrinking. Our manufacturing sector is $3.4 trillion annually. To put things in perspective, India's entire GDP is 2.2 trillion. So we're not doing so bad. And manufacturing is 40% higher than 20 years ago. So don't feel too bad about U.S. manufacturing. In fact, in terms of economic output, it's doing pretty well. Employment is the issue in manufacturing. Currently, there are about 12.5 million people employed in manufacturing in the United States. That's down 5 million since 2000. And that's the big story. We've lost, over a third of the people who used to work in manufacturing. They no longer have those manufacturing jobs. But we have 1 million more in manufacturing, so 15% increase since 2009. So the long-term story, it's down quite a bit since 2000, but in the past several years since the depth of the Great Recession, it's actually increased by quite a bit. Something that most people don't seem to recognize is that our manufacturing is actually small and mid-sized enterprises. There are about 250,000 companies in the United States that are manufacturers, and really only 2,800 of these employ more than 500 employees. 75% have less than 20 employees. So, in fact, much of the manufacturing base in the United States, in terms of numbers of manufacturers, are actually smaller companies. Here's the clincher for manufacturing in the United States. The average wage plus benefits in manufacturing is $82,000 annually. $82,000 annually. So my question to you is, how many people, skilled laborers, can you hire in India for 82,000? I think it's quite a few. So there's been a lot of discussion about bringing jobs back to the U.S. and America first and make America great again. Let me give you my perspective on the situation. What this means is final assembly and big splashy plants are the political goal. Our politicians, they need to point to things that voters understand. They need to point to manufacturing facilities where basically final assembly is taking place. Components subassemblies, replacement parts, spares. These are all wide open for business. In fact, more so than ever, because if final assembly comes back to the US and the supply chain is not here to support it, let me tell you, one way or another, these OEMs who do the final assembly, they're going to get their components. I maintain that India is extraordinarily positioned in a great way to gain US market share in all of the above. So now let's change our attention, let's turn our attention to expectations of US customers. And so I have this little cartoon that I really like. And so it's a bunch of Indian, it's actually from a Indian publication. So you have all these Indians hanging onto a train and a quotation, "Is there a life down here?" And you've got the rocket blasting off and the little quote up there in the corner, "Is there life on Mars?" Well, as Indians, you all know that India has a very active space program. You've got a satellite orbiting Mars by now. In fact, my wife and I were living in Bombay when you all launched that rocket. And most Americans don't even know that you have a space program. They certainly would be surprised to know that you've got a satellite orbiting Mars. Most Americans would have the picture of the train with the people hanging on it as their idea of what India is all about, because they've been educated by Slumdog Millionaire and the such. So here's something that you should be aware of. In terms of what Americans think about Indians, or what they know about Indians, is I think a better way of saying it. They know that Indians have great cuisine because we have a number of Indian restaurants, and Indian cuisine has become pretty popular here. Maybe not as popular as in the UK, but pretty popular. We talk to a lot of Indians, primarily at call centers, and so most Americans know Indians from call centers. And a number of us go to Indian physicians because we know Indians are very intelligent, and those that aren't in IT or owning hotels or running restaurants, they're doctors. Fact of the matter is, you guys know a lot more about Americans than most Americans know about Indians. Just a little more than 1% of the USA is Indian American. So, other than the large cities on the coasts and a few other select places, most Americans don't know much about Indians. And that carries over to those that make purchasing decisions throughout the United States. So, keep that in mind as you're trying to do business here in the US. So let's turn our attention to what's important to US customers. And I'll start out with quality. And I cannot overemphasize quality. Quality is job 1, 2, and 3. You can screw up only once. Maybe you can screw up more than once if you have a really good representative in the US, like myself, who can maybe get you out of trouble, but not too many times. If you can consistently deliver required quality, you will be hard to replace. That I can tell you in all confidence. Getting to the required quality on complex components requires investment on your part. If you're not willing to invest in doing a quality job, so that quality is job 1, 2, and 3, you probably should not be thinking about supplying anything for the US market. As I indicated earlier, it's just too expensive here in terms of manufacturing jobs. $83,000 a year as a fully loaded cost. If you screw up and things need to be fixed here, it costs a huge amount of money. And your customer base just isn't going to tolerate it. They can't afford it. A local presence is essential. I'm located in Western North Carolina, pretty central to just about anything of significance in the United States, and I have no trouble getting on a plane. I'm in the same time zone as much of your customer base, no more than a 3 hours time zone difference from the entire US. And these discussions in the same time zone are important. Part of what I do for you and for Synergy is to bridge cultural and business expectations. Indians and Americans, they both think that since you both speak English, that you understand each other. Trust me, that's not necessarily the case. It is an extraordinary advantage that Indians speak English compared to your Chinese competitors. However, it can also be a two-edged sword. And much of what I do is trying to make sure that the US customer understands India and that the Indian supply base understands the requirements here. So as a old business guy with white hair who has a lot of credibility, at least in the eyes of the US population, I have a lot of credibility as knowing something about India. That's what I do. I help bridge those cultural and business expectations. There's a lot of underlying nuances in any culture that I can help with, and I do help with in terms of understanding what's really going on. And again, it's important to have a local presence in order to get that done. Achieving long-term satisfaction and higher customer retention, that's an important part of having a local presence. And that's something I'm pledged to do for Synergy and for you, and frankly for myself. I don't get paid unless the customer is satisfied, and there would be nothing better than to keep customers for a long, long time and continue to grow with them. So, my next point in terms of what your customers expect, this is a drone delivering an Amazon Prime package. This isn't quite happening yet in the United States, but the point I want to make is supply chain here is a science. It's extraordinarily optimized and will continue to be optimized. Customers here expect perfect delivery every time. Perfect delivery every time. I cannot stress that after quality, you had better deliver on time and every time, if at all possible, with very few exceptions. So that's my presentation for you today. Again, I wish I could be there with you. I want to thank you for your time. And I want to say that I'm here to help you in any way that I can. We're all after the same thing, a lot of business here in the United States. So again, God bless, and I hope to meet you on a trip to India here sometime. Thank you.